Hi there. My name is Nate Ridgway, and I am a teacher in Avon, Indiana. And what I'm here to do today, as the start of this YouTube channel, which I had for a while, but now I'm kind of rebooting here, is to take you through what it is like to, for example, if this is a history class that you've now just started for this, current year, or maybe you haven't been in one for a while, is kind of a guide to how to think like a historian, both for you as a high school student, and then as well to kind of start to begin to think about how to kind of approach your history class, whatever that may be. Now, that all being said, first of all, I do not have a PhD in history. I'm a teacher, so I have a background in that as well as a master's degree in history itself. So I'm kind of trying to bridge the two worlds here together and hopefully come up with something that's effective for you in terms of how you're going to approach not only my class, but whatever history class you might have in the future. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And you can kind of see over here my objectives. I'm pulling from one of our first lessons that we'll be doing here, and we're going to be looking at how does a historian think about the past, and then also starting to think about how is a historian different than other people, like archaeologists or paleontologists or people like that, anthropologists, etc. And then also, last but not least, how does a historian actually differ than somebody who's just walking down the street thinking about typical things going on in their life. So let's get going. We are going to first talk about how to take notes effectively. Now, this could be an entirely way longer video that I could do on this, but I'll try to give you the quick and short synopsis that I recommend for really any history class in terms of how you approach taking notes. So for me personally, in my classes, I provide a whole variety of ways you can take notes. You can do them on your own, like in a Word doc or like in a notebook. In mine, I also provide like a blank outline. It kind of looks like Cornell notes. And there's also ones that I have that, at least early on, provide you kind of a more fill-in-the-blank option if you need that support. My goal, though, is that for you as an individual, that you should always be trying to move up to a less supported style. Again, the goal here is that you become more independent as time goes on. Now, with notes, there's so many different methods out there. There's really no particularly right one way to take notes. They eventually become something that's very personal to you, and that's why they matter. But I can give you a few different guidelines to follow, no matter what course and class you might be taking ever. First, never write down word for word what a person is saying, okay, or what's up on the board. You're going to be wasting your time. I highly recommend that you start to begin to use some version of shorthand. So, for example, leaving out article adjectives, a and the. Not really crucially necessary to understanding what's going on. For example, like one of the ones that I give it as an example in my classes, if I was writing this sentence, General Washington crossed the Delaware. You can see I would write Gin, Wash, Arrow, Delaware. And eventually I might just drop the gin altogether because I know who this is referring to. Now, again, if you're like, I don't understand what that means, there's no action, there's no, there's nothing there that helps me understand. Well, remember, that's a note for me, not for you. So you need to make notations in terms of shorthand that give you the understanding that you need, not necessarily somebody else, which is kind of strange to think about. Second, I highly recommend that in whatever history class you're taking, that you start to think about prioritizing big ideas and concepts first, and then specific people, places, things, times periods, those kind of things. The reason why I would recommend like big important ideas, concepts, significance, critical thinking, that kind of stuff first is because people, places, things, time periods, etc., those can all be Googled later. And so again, the idea is that we're taking down the big important stuff first. And then last but not least, no matter how you take notes, draw pictures. Okay, I do expect that all my students in class begin to draw pictures along with their notes. In our current era of COVID right now, that's really, really difficult because I can't give out paper things, but you can still drop in clip art or, go find different, symbols and things like that that you can just drop in very quickly that give you some kind of representative knowledge of what you're doing. The reason why you draw pictures is because your brain will make better connections to what you're learning. It's just scientifically proven. I highly recommend you do it. So doodling on notes is definitely a good thing. Okay. And that's kind of my overall gist with notes. So with that, aside, okay, that was kind of my first objective, is how to just kind of do effective note taking. Let's talk about why a historian, in terms of you in a class or in a history class, is going to think a little bit differently than you might assume. Okay, so how do historians think about the past, and how are we different than other related professions? It's going to be our two big goals here. So, number one, a historian is going to work with two different types of sources. Okay, primary and secondary. And you'll notice immediately I'm talking about sources, and that is because technically the definition of a historian is, or really the definition of history rather, is the period when writing starts all the way up to the present. Okay, so it's a long time. Now, as soon as you go before writing, we're in a different profession that is sometimes called, the dark arts of archaeology or other things like that. Okay, but let's talk about what these sources are of writing that historians like to pull from. Okay, primary sources are sources that are just like what they sound like. It was somebody who was primarily there, a witness. Okay, good examples of primary sources might be like newspapers from that time period, diaries, letters, all those kind of things. Okay, modern day more examples be like Twitter, TikTok, things like that. Okay, and then secondary sources are when we take large collections of primary sources. Somebody takes all those, they take a step back, they think about them, and then they give us an interpretation of those things. Now, with sources, we have to be really, really careful. We have to think about their backgrounds. We have to think about what, like what's going on in their lives that might have influenced their, particular writing. We also have to be careful of something called hindsight. And so, for example, like we can look at a source and be incredibly judgy about it because we're like, wow, that was really dumb. Why didn't they see that coming? And that's called hindsight. Okay, that particular mistake. It's judging the past from our perspective in the future of what we know now. The competent historian, to the greatest degree possible, is going to try to place things in the context of their own time. And that means being aware of their own biases, being aware of the biases of others, and then trying to either acknowledge or work around those. And here's really the kind of the divide between what you might think of as like common sense thinking versus how a historian thinks. So one correct answer that never changes would be it's always America or freedom. It would be a good example of this. Situation judged from a single perspective. And then again, the mistake of hindsight down there, current time looking backwards. But a historian's going to think very, very differently. And it's going to have to do with kind of two themes. The first is that we like to look at things from multiple different perspectives after a lot of thinking. Okay, and those sources can be, again, they can range widely. Obviously, historians can borrow from interpretations that are, more current in other social sciences. And then lastly, we're going to use history to also then kind of think about themes that are currently echoing on in our own time. So we try to do the opposite of hindsight. Okay. Again, how is a historian different? They like writing. That's the big thing. Now, they may, again, dabble in the dark arts of other things like songs, pictures, things like that, storytelling. But those become difficult because noting, like having a standard history that you can know that it hasn't been changed over time kind of becomes difficult. An archaeologist, though, is a very, very different profession. Okay, archaeologists, the easy way to remember this one is they study dead things. Now, I don't necessarily mean dead bodies. I also mean like dead cultures, dead, and past peoples. They're going to especially look at like artifacts, remains, tools, structures, those kinds of things. Anthropologists are going to do the soft stuff of past peoples. They're going to look at beliefs, cultures, different, values that people in the past might have had. And a paleontologist is nothing at all like those three. They're going to be studying fossils. But I have legitimately had students who believe that historians do work with fossils. That is just simply not the case. So there you go. Hopefully a good guide. And that's all I got for you. A good guide to history, kind of note taking, as well as really note taking in any class, and then also about how historians think. So look forward to seeing you next video. Bye bye.